15-year-old Eli Carter lives in the suffocating gray of grief after his father's death, finding his only escape in a stack of abandoned canvases. His secret turns into a roar when street artist Marcus shows him how to use color to give voice to the ignored streets of Atlanta, transforming Eli into one half of the mysterious Canvas Kids. But when the establishment crushes their most powerful act of resistance, Eli is forced to move his fight from the public wall to a deeply vulnerable private canvas, setting him on a fast-paced collision course with fame, devastating loss, and the ultimate discovery that true art doesn't live on the wall, but in the unshakable resilience of the soul. If you liked the video and have subscribed to my channel, let's move on to our story. Enjoy watching. The silence of the apartment was a heavy, suffocating thing, pressing down on the threadbare carpet and the peeling wallpaper. It wasn't the peace of quiet, it was the absence of sound that should have been there, the sound of laughter, of a workshop radio, of a father's booming, encouraging voice. 15-year-old Eli Carter sat on the edge of a worn sofa that smelled faintly of industrial cleanser, the late afternoon sun casting long accusatory streaks of dust across the floor. He didn't move. He hadn't moved much since the funeral, not really. His body went through the motions of school, of chores, of forced, quiet dinners, but the boy inside was a statue carved from loss. Their apartment, number 3C, was in a block of concrete indifference in Atlanta's West End. It was the kind of building that felt like it was perpetually holding its breath, a place where dreams went to hibernate and often never woke up. The rent was steep, an insultingly high price for the constant background noise of the city and the unreliable hot water. Denise Carter, Eli's mother, paid it anyway. She worked double shifts, sometimes triple, her life an endless, grinding cycle of the hospital floor. A licensed practical nurse, she treated other people's pain all day, only to come home too exhausted to tend to her own or critically to Eli's. When she was home, she moved like a ghost, efficient, quiet, and profoundly weary. "Got a 12-hour scheduled, baby?" she'd murmur, kissing his forehead with lips that tasted like coffee and hospital air. "Make sure you eat the leftovers. I left $5 for the bus." The ritual was the same every time, a quiet acknowledgement of the gulf that had opened between them, one neither of them knew how to cross. Eli would nod, a single, curt motion. He knew she was drowning, but he was too busy battling the undertow himself to throw her a rope. He had retreated, becoming a study in muted colors and quiet avoidance. His school grades were passable, his room tidy, his presence minimal. He was trying to be easy, to be less of a burden, to not add to the crushing weight his mother carried. But by doing so he was erasing himself. One Tuesday his history teacher, a kindly silver-haired woman named Ms. Harper, had pressed a crisp $20 bill into his hand. "The old community center is having a clean-out before they start renovations," she explained, her voice low and empathetic. "An extra pair of hands will speed things up, Eli. And you need the money." He hadn't wanted to go. It meant interacting, making small talk, pretending his insides weren't hollowed out. But the $20 was 2 hours of his mother's back-breaking labor, and that was a currency he couldn't ignore. The center was a cavernous, neglected space a few blocks away, reeking of dust, old gym socks, and forgotten ambition. Eli spent the first 2 hours hauling broken folding chairs and throwing out moldy textbooks. His work was methodical, almost meditative. He wanted to be invisible, a cleaning machine that required no input. But in the deep recesses of a storage closet, tucked behind a stack of busted trophies and moth-eaten flags, he found a cache of items that seemed to vibrate with a history far more interesting than the discarded sports equipment. It was a stack of perhaps a dozen forgotten canvases, some still wrapped in stiff plastic, others splotched with dried-up, unidentifiable paint. Lying beside them was a chipped ceramic mug holding a bundle of paintbrushes, their bristles stiff, their wooden handles stained with the ghosts of colors past. They had clearly been abandoned for years, destined for the dumpster. Eli stopped cleaning. He knelt down, running a cautious fingertip over the rough surface of the canvas. The texture was strange, alien, yet profoundly intriguing. It felt like a blank page, but with the promise of something more substantial than mere words. The manager, a large, distracted man named Mr. Jenkins, shuffled past the open closet door. "Just toss that art junk, Carter," he instructed without looking up. "No one's touched it since '98. It's garbage." Garbage. The word struck Eli as entirely wrong. This wasn't refuse, it was potential, sealed and forgotten. On an impulse he couldn't explain, a sudden sharp deviation from his routine of quiet obedience, Eli picked up the smallest, cleanest canvas and one brush with surprisingly soft bristles. He tucked them swiftly under his worn hoodie. Mr. Jenkins hadn't even looked his way. The theft was petty, insignificant, yet it felt like the most rebellious, momentous thing Eli had done in over a year. He walked the few blocks home, the canvas a hard, rectangular secret pressed against his side. The bus fare money burned a hole in his pocket, but he didn't care. He needed to be alone with this object. He hurried past the usual crowds, ignoring the sirens and the blaring music, the entire vibrant chaos of Atlanta melting into a dull, gray blur until he reached the quiet oblivion of apartment 3C. Denise was still at work. The apartment was as silent and heavy as before, but now there was a distinct, palpable difference in the air. Eli went straight to his tiny bedroom. He didn't put the canvas in the closet or under the bed. He propped it up against the far wall, the one that had nothing on it but a faint, rectangular discoloration where a cheap poster had once hung. He stared at it. The canvas was stark white, almost glowing in the muted bedroom light. It was an empty wall, a void. But unlike the void he felt inside, this one was inviting, expectant. It wasn't waiting for a wound to heal, it was waiting for a beginning. He unwrapped the plastic, running his hand over the coarse fabric stretched tight across the wooden frame. He looked at the solitary brush in his other hand. It felt impossibly heavy, an instrument of creation he was not equipped to wield. He didn't know how to mix paint, how to hold the brush, or how to translate the swirling, inchoate mass of feeling inside him into line and color. Most importantly, he didn't know what to paint. The gray was still there, the pervasive, dull wash over the world, but the empty canvas was pushing back against it. He sat on the floor, cross-legged, the seconds stretching into minutes, the minutes into an hour. He stared, not blinking, his mind a whirlwind of static. Paint the loneliness? Paint the quiet fury? Paint the fading memory of his father's smile? He picked up the brush, held it over the canvas, and hesitated. He was 15 years old, lost, withdrawn, and now, for the first time since the tragedy, he was holding something that felt like a key, a potential escape route from the cage of his own silence. But the door was locked by indecision. He spent the rest of the evening there, staring at it for hours, unsure what to paint, but profoundly sure, on a deep, instinctual level, that he couldn't put it back. The empty wall had finally called out, and Eli Carter had, at last, answered. The first stroke was a violation. After hours of staring, the pure, blinding white of the canvas had become an oppressive silence. Eli couldn't stand it anymore. He hadn't bought paint, he hadn't dared risk the bus fare or the scrutiny, so he had scrounged. He found an old tin of house paint in the utility closet, a flat, unforgiving gray left over from a landlord's rushed repair job. Then, in an almost frantic surge of desperate creation, he mixed that gray with a dollop of deep, mustard yellow poster paint he'd found abandoned in his school backpack from a project 2 years ago. The resulting color was muddy, bruised, and perfectly represented the noise in his head. He held the brush like a weapon, not an instrument. When the bristles finally scraped across the canvas, the sound was harsh, tearing the perfect silence of his room. The action was clumsy, driven by pure instinct. He didn't sketch, he didn't plan. He just pushed the thick, sludge-like color around. It was a release, not an act of skill. His wrist was stiff, his movements jerky, the results predictably messy colors and uneven lines. He painted aggressively, working quickly before the fear of failure could paralyze him again. He didn't care about beauty, he cared about noise, the sudden loud noise of putting his internal chaos on a two-dimensional plane. When he finally stepped back, sweating slightly, his heart hammering against his ribs, he saw the grotesque reflection of his mind. It wasn't abstract, not exactly. It was the skyline, the familiar, imposing city skyline of Atlanta, rendered in harsh blacks and polluted yellows. But the buildings weren't clean lines of glass and steel, they were jagged teeth chewing at the sky. The work was raw, unfiltered, and deeply flawed, yet there was a visceral power to it. Then, his eyes caught the one thing he hadn't consciously intended, a shadowy figure lurking behind the horizon line. It wasn't defined, just a smear of heavy, charcoal black paint that seemed to watch the city from the darkness. It was the specter of his grief, the unshakable feeling that he was being observed, judged, or perhaps haunted by what he'd lost. It was the feeling that had been following him since his father passed. The realization that his loss wasn't just a wound, but a permanent, dark shape in the landscape of his life. The painting was ugly, but it was honest. And for Eli, honesty felt like oxygen. Painting became his secret, his escape. He bought cheap tubes of acrylics from a dollar store, hoarding the small purchases like a miser. He learned to work fast, to listen for his mother's key turning in the lock, and to hide the canvas immediately under his mattress, covering his brushes in an old sock. The apartment became a stage for a silent, desperate performance. He painted after school, before dawn, and late at night, fueled by lukewarm coffee and the adrenaline of keeping the work hidden. The more he painted, the less burdensome the silence of the apartment felt, because his own voice, a silent one articulated through color, was beginning to emerge. His technique, born of necessity and impatience, improved rapidly. He learned about layering thick color to create texture, about the brutal contrast between a stark white background and a single splash of red. His canvases were small, confined, but his themes were huge. The weight of poverty, the crushing anonymity of the urban sprawl, the fierce, protective love he felt for his mother, and the profound, aching sadness of being 15 without a compass. The works were always dark, but in the deepest blues and browns, there was always a pinprick of violent, surprising color, a splash of electric green or vivid orange, that hinted at the life he was fighting to reclaim. The secret was a fragile thing, and one cold, rainy evening, it shattered. Denise had come home early. A 12-hour shift had been canceled due to a power outage at the hospital. She was exhausted, soaked, and looking forward to the brief, numb peace of a night off. Eli, absorbed in a piece that depicted a cracked open street revealing glowing, pulsating roots beneath, didn't hear her. He was so engrossed, so lost in the movement of his hand, that he didn't realize she was standing in his bedroom doorway until she cleared her throat, a soft, startled sound. Eli. He froze, his hands suspended over the canvas, his heart vaulting into his throat. He turned, defensively shielding the piece with his body. The shame was instant and overwhelming, the fear of judgment a cold shock. Denise stepped into the small room. She didn't raise her voice, but her eyes, normally dulled by fatigue, were wide and sharp. What is that, baby?" he stammered. "It's nothing, Mom. Just messing around." She moved past him, gently, and the moment she saw the canvas, she stopped breathing. This painting was a self-portrait of sorts. The outline of a boy facing away from the viewer, his hands pressed against a wall that was dissolving into streaks of sorrowful violet and angry crimson. The pain was explicit, raw, almost physically present on the canvas. She looked at the harsh, urgent brushstrokes, the desperate use of color, and the sheer, unexpected depth of the emotion contained within the small frame. She had seen his withdrawal, his silence, his quiet grief. But she hadn't seen this. This was the cry of pain she had been unable to coax from him for months. This was the voice he had been hiding. "Eli," she whispered, her own voice cracking. "This is so heavy." She wasn't talking about the weight of the paint, she was talking about the weight of the boy's soul. She ran a weary, trembling hand over her face. "You've been holding this inside?" His instinct was to retreat, to minimize the vulnerability. He forced a shrug, putting his brush down with a clatter. He brushed it off, using the casual, disinterested tone he'd perfected over the last year. "Yeah, well, it's just a doodle. Something to do, you know?" He tried to move the canvas to hide it again, but she put a gentle hand on his arm, stopping him. She looked from the painting to her son. She saw the dried paint speckling his hands, the intensity in his guarded eyes. She recognized the fierce, almost desperate energy of creation. Denise, though she knew little of art, knew her son. This wasn't a doodle. This was an exorcism. "It's more than a doodle, Eli," she said softly, but with a firmness that surprised him. It's like a scream, baby. A beautiful, sad scream." He couldn't meet her eyes. He was mortified that she had seen the inside of his private prison. He stood silent, waiting for the lecture about spending money on supplies, about wasting time, about cleaning up the mess. But it didn't come. Instead, she simply sighed, a sound of profound understanding and sorrow. "Don't hide this," she finally said, her eyes glistening. "If this is where you put the dark things, don't hide it." She leaned down and kissed his temple, her lips still cool from the rain. "I'm making tea." And with that, she left him, the secret now shared, the silence between them now containing the possibility of a new conversation, one made of color and shape. Eli stood alone again, staring at the canvas that had betrayed his emotions. His heart still pounded, but the fear was slowly replaced by a strange, exhilarating feeling. His mother hadn't recoiled. She had acknowledged the scream. Inside, he felt something awakening, a hot, vital energy that had nothing to do with sadness. It was the feeling of power, the realization that he didn't need words to speak the truth. He had found a voice through color, and the first messy, hesitant strokes had cracked the gray shell he'd built around himself. The empty wall was empty no more. He picked up his brush, dipped it in a pure, shockingly bright red, and added a single defiant streak across the shadowy figure. He was ready to paint the world. Eli's life had fractured into two distinct realities. By day, he was the same quiet, watchful boy moving through the gray hallways of high school and the silence of apartment 3C. By night, under the solitary glow of a bare light bulb, he was a silent, furious mechanic of color, his small canvases documenting the raw, unedited landscape of his soul. His mother, Denise, kept her word. She didn't interfere or question, only leaving him an occasional container of lukewarm cocoa by his door. But his small room was quickly running out of space. He needed a larger canvas, a bolder expression than four walls could contain. He needed the world. He found it, or perhaps it found him, under the low-slung concrete belly of the I-20 overpass, a notorious corridor of noise and shadow a few miles from his home. He had been lurking there on a Friday night, simply observing the colossal, neglected space when he saw him. The artist was tall, lean, and moved with the confident, proprietary grace of someone who owned the concrete he stood on. His name was Marcus, and at 17 he was already a master of the colossal, the ephemeral, and the illegal. Marcus was working on a mural, a massive, swirling, neon-drenched portrait of a phoenix rising from a pile of shattered traffic signs. The size alone was intimidating, but it was the technique that stunned Eli into paralysis. Marcus wasn't painting, he was orchestrating. He wielded cans of spray paint like a conductor's baton, his movements economical, the layers of color building up with unbelievable speed, precision, and depth. Eli stood back in the shadows, his hands jammed deep into his pockets, watching for a full hour. When Marcus finally capped a can and stepped back to assess his work, he saw Eli immediately. Marcus's eyes, bright and intelligent behind a dusting of orange paint, narrowed. "You a cop or just lost?" Marcus's voice was low, carrying a slight, amused challenge. Eli straightened, the adrenaline surging. "Neither. I paint." Marcus laughed, a short, sharp sound that echoed in the vast space. He gestured to the sprawling masterpiece covering 200 square feet of concrete. "Yeah. You paint walls or you paint memories?" Eli swallowed, realizing the distinction was profound. He reached into his beat-up messenger bag and pulled out his latest, a small acrylic piece depicting a fractured stoplight bleeding colors onto a dark, wet street. He held it up silently. Marcus took the small canvas, turning it under the harsh streetlights. He studied the messy colors and the raw, unpolished emotion. He didn't scoff. He didn't lecture. He simply nodded, a slow, deliberate approval. "You got the eye, kid. The fear's coming off this thing like steam, but you let the color fight it. What's your name?" "Eli." "Marcus, you want to learn to paint bigger than your bedroom?" That night changed everything. Marcus didn't just see potential in Eli. He saw an equal capacity for controlled anger and visual storytelling. He became Eli's unlikely, intense, and demanding mentor. Marcus taught him the science of the street, how to mix spray paint to get complex, gradient tones, how to layer texture to give a flat wall 3 dimensions, the essential lightning-fast push-pull of a proper technique. More than technique, he taught him the philosophy. "A canvas is a conversation with yourself," Marcus explained one night, his breath fogging in the cold air as they staked out a spot near a disused warehouse. "A wall? A wall is a shout to the whole neighborhood. You can't just talk about yourself here. You gotta tell stories visually, the stories of the people who walk past this wall every day. Give them a mirror or give them a window." They began painting at night, usually the deep hours between midnight and dawn, cloaked in the anonymity of darkness. Eli learned to be fast, silent, and decisive. His first works with Marcus were simple tags and outlines, but soon they were collaborating on large-scale pieces. They painted messages of hope on the walls of struggling businesses and messages of sorrow on crumbling, forgotten churches. They painted justice into the dark corners of the city, a vibrant, visual commentary on the systemic indifference they witnessed daily. Eli's style, once confined and tormented, began to stretch, incorporating the bold, unapologetic lines of spray paint. He learned to trust the vastness of the wall, to pour his inner life into the public square. He was still the boy who saw gray, but now he was actively covering that gray with defiant, electric colors. He felt a sense of belonging and fierce exhilaration he hadn't known was possible. They worked together so often, their styles beginning to intertwine, Eli's depth and dark emotion blending with Marcus's kinetic energy and bold outlines, that their nocturnal activities drew attention. People noticed. Not the police yet, but the people who lived, worked, and breathed in the forgotten pockets of Atlanta. The paintings were too powerful to be ignored. They weren't meaningless graffiti, they were narratives of the community, appearing and disappearing overnight like urban folklore. Soon, whispered rumors began circulating in the local diner, the barbershops, and the laundromats. People started looking for the new works, driving past derelict lots just to catch a glimpse before morning broke. The artist became a legend, a shadow identity. In the glow of the half-moon, applying a final, perfect fade from deep purple to sky blue, Marcus leaned back, his eyes catching the light. "We ain't ghosts anymore, Eli," he said, handing him a clean rag. "We're known." "Known as what?" Eli asked, his pulse still high from the speed and secrecy of the work. Marcus grinned, a flash of white in the darkness. "We're the Canvas Kids. They're calling us the Canvas Kids." The name landed on Eli like a medal, heavy, bright, and utterly unexpected. It was the first time in his life he felt he was part of something bigger than his own grief, part of a duo creating a collective voice for the unheard. He was no longer the withdrawn boy in 3C, silently mourning a loss. He was a Canvas Kid, and his art was speaking to the streets of Atlanta. The small canvas under his bed still held his secret pain, but the walls held his rising purpose. The empty wall of his soul was filling up, stroke by powerful, illegal stroke. The shared identity of the Canvas Kids had galvanized Eli. He wasn't just hiding in the shadows anymore. He was a participant, an agent of visual change. He and Marcus were fearless, driven by a shared, simmering dissatisfaction with the neglect endemic to their part of the city. They felt the rhythm of the neighborhood and translated its unspoken pain into defiant bursts of color. The crisis arrived not with a whimper, but with the roar of heavy machinery. The local youth center, a vital, if aging, sanctuary where kids could find tutoring, mentorship, and a warm meal, was suddenly slated for demolition. The official reason was structural instability, but everyone knew it was a cynical move to clear the land for luxury condos. Another piece of their past being paved over for someone else's profit. The police arrived one cold, wet morning, establishing a perimeter to keep the protesters and distraught parents at bay while the wrecking ball swung. The destruction felt personal to Eli, a punch to the gut. The center had been a haven for the younger siblings of his classmates, a place he himself might have found solace if he hadn't retreated so deeply after his father's death. Watching the building fall was like watching his own fragile hope crumble all over again. That night Eli and Marcus didn't need to speak to plan. Their rage had a color, a shape, and a location. They worked with a furious, almost desperate intensity, choosing the largest, most visible retaining wall near the demolition site, a monolithic gray barrier that screamed anonymity. They were no longer simply painting, they were documenting a tragedy and building a monument to defiance. Their collaborative mural was a raw, heartbreaking triumph. It wasn't abstract, it was a clear, figurative scene. Marcus, with his skill for rapid, powerful figuration, painted the ghostly, energetic outlines of the children who had used the center, jumping, laughing, learning. Eli filled those outlines not with solid color, but with the shimmering, fractured light he had learned to create, making the children appear translucent, like fading memories. At the center, they rendered the broken pediment of the center's entrance, tilted and cracked, but still sheltering a single, defiant sunflower. The message was clear. A massive visual elegy honoring the kids who lost their safe space and a damning indictment of the indifference that caused it. The next morning, the reaction was explosive. People didn't just look at the mural, they stood before it in silent, grieving crowds. They took pictures. They left flowers and small notes stuck to the damp concrete. Within hours, the image of the ghostly children and the broken sunflower went viral online. Local journalists and bloggers picked up the story, and suddenly the mural wasn't just a piece of street art, it was a powerful, symbolic image of resilience and community loss. It was proof that the neighborhood would not be demolished in silence. The Canvas Kids had become the accidental, anonymous spokespersons for their community, but they had challenged the wrong people. The triumph was short-lived, measured in mere hours. The city authorities, already irritated by the bad press surrounding the demolition, reacted with swift, authoritarian malice. They didn't see art or protest, they saw damage. They issued a terse statement calling the mural unauthorized defacement and blatant vandalism. By mid-afternoon, before the evening news could even broadcast footage of the piece, a crew arrived. Eli was skipping a study hall to check on the mural when he saw the massive sanitation trucks, the harsh glare of work lights, and the men in uniforms. He watched from the corner, his stomach twisting into a painful knot, as they blasted the wall with high-pressure jets, then covered the remaining defiant colors with thick industrial-grade gray paint. It was methodical, complete, and utterly brutal. In less than an hour, the powerful statement, the collective shout of the community, was gone. Erased. Eli felt a profound, crushing sense of defeat. It was worse than the apathy he had felt before he found the canvases. This time he had tried to speak, to fight, to make his voice public, and the city had responded by silencing him with an ugly, permanent blankness. Eli felt crushed. His entire effort, his growing confidence, his voice erased again. It felt like the shadow of his grief had won, proving that anything he created could be taken away, destroyed, or painted over. He walked back to Marcus's makeshift workspace under the bridge, his shoulders slumped, carrying the heavy weight of the city's rejection. Marcus was cleaning his brushes, his face grim. He had already heard. He saw the look in Eli's eyes, the familiar wounded look of the boy who had retreated into silence. They did it, Eli managed, his voice hoarse. They painted it over. Marcus looked up, his expression hardening with a shared resentment but not despair. He walked over and put a paint-stained hand on Eli's shoulder, turning him to face the dark, expansive concrete wall they used for practice. "Look at this wall, Eli," Marcus instructed. "It's just concrete. It's temporary. It's always temporary." He knelt down and picked up a can, drawing a single confident blue line across the blank surface. He met Eli's gaze, his eyes intense and steady. "They have gallons of gray paint, kid. They have the trucks and the budget. They can always win the battle for the wall, yeah." He paused, letting the bitter truth sink in. Then he said the words that hit Eli with the force of a revelation. "They can paint over walls, but not your purpose." "Your purpose isn't on that concrete," Marcus continued. "It's what you learned while you were making it. The technique, the story, the way you felt that fire in your chest. That's yours. They can't erase that, man. They just gave you a blank slate. We start again. But we paint smarter next time. We paint where they can't reach, or we paint what they can't ignore." The sting of the gray paint was still raw, but Marcus's words, sharp and clear, were a lifeline. Eli looked at the blank, demanding wall, and then at his own paint-stained hands. The fire was still there, banked low but not extinguished. He had been silenced, but he had also been heard. The struggle was not over, it had simply shifted. He picked up a can of deep, vivid violet, a color Marcus rarely used, and began to sketch the outline of a new idea, one that was harder to see but impossible to forget. Marcus's fierce conviction, "They can paint over walls but not your purpose," had stopped Eli from sinking back into the silence. He and Marcus were back on the streets, but they were painting smarter, choosing less accessible, smaller, more intricate spaces. Abandoned loading docks, the inside of disused cisterns, places where their art was a discovery, not a confrontation. But the exhilaration of public defiance felt hollowed out, the victory transient. Eli was still wrestling with the core of his pain, the loss of his father, which remained a private, unaddressed wound. The external noise had quieted, forcing him back into the quiet introspection of his smaller canvases. It was in one of these reflective moments, sketching furiously in his geometry notebook during a boring lecture, that his secret spilled over into a new, unwelcome arena. Miss Harper, his history teacher, the same woman who had given him the $20 that started it all, was known for her uncanny perceptiveness. She had noticed the intricate, almost frantic energy of his drawings, architectural lines that fractured into storms of emotion, faces that were mere outlines but held the weight of the world in their eyes. She had seen his potential long before Marcus had, but had respected his silence. Until now. One Tuesday after the final bell had rung, Eli returned to the classroom for a forgotten textbook and found Ms. Harper holding his geometry notebook open on her desk. She didn't look up immediately. The silence in the empty classroom was thick with confrontation. "Eli," she said, finally raising her head, her gaze soft but unwavering. "These sketches. They're extraordinary." Eli's immediate reaction was a surge of white-hot panic and fury. "That's private, Miss Harper," he snapped, reaching for the book. He hated that she had invaded the one space he believed was his alone. He felt a resurgence of the shame and anger he'd felt when his mother first saw his canvas. He never wanted attention, especially not this kind of soft, well-meaning scrutiny. Ms. Harper gently closed the notebook but held it firmly. "I know. And I've respected your privacy, Eli. But this is too important to keep locked in a textbook." She pushed a glossy brochure across the desk. It was an application for the annual City Youth Art Contest, a highly prestigious local event culminating in a public gallery show. "I took a photograph of one of your earlier charcoal sketches. The one of the broken window with the single flame. I secretly entered one of your works." He stared at the brochure, then at her, his face hot with indignation. "You didn't have the right to do that," he ground out, the words tasting like metal. "I don't want to be in some gallery. That's not my art. My art is on the street. My art is meant to be erased. My art is safe because it's anonymous." "Your art is what you make it, Eli," she countered calmly. "And the art you're making is too powerful to stay hidden. You don't have to win. You don't even have to attend. But I want you to go to the opening night. Just observe. See what it's like to share your voice in a different kind of forum." Eli took the brochure and stormed out, feeling manipulated and exposed. He spent the next week simmering, ignoring Ms. Harper's gentle waves in the hallway. He told Marcus about the invasion of privacy, expecting righteous indignation. Instead, Marcus merely shrugged. "Look, I paint walls to shout, you paint canvases to talk. Same thing, different volume. You're mad because someone wants you to be seen without a mask, and you're scared of what they'll see." The night of the contest opening, Eli went, but only out of obligation and a morbid curiosity to see what Ms. Harper had submitted. He dressed in his cleanest hoodie and slid into the back of the bustling gallery space, feeling painfully out of place among the crisp linens and polite chatter. But as he moved through the curated exhibits, something began to shift. He saw a photograph of a girl's scar, framed and titled "Where the Light Gets In." He saw a clay sculpture depicting the crushing weight of academic pressure, its surface deeply scored with tiny, furious words. He saw oil paintings drenched in the chaos of family dysfunction. He saw other artists, young like him, who were using the canvas, the frame, and the pedestal as a confessional. He wasn't looking at technical perfection. He was looking at vulnerability. He realized he was not an anomaly, not the only one channeling his darkness into creation. He saw the quiet courage in their choices. For the first time, seeing their brave exposure, he realized he wasn't alone in using art as a way to process the brutal, beautiful facts of life. The gallery space, usually a sterile, intimidating environment in his imagination, suddenly felt less like a cage and more like a collective breath. The terror of being seen began to lessen, replaced by a strange, compelling urge to share. He went home that night, not to his usual hidden canvas, but to a pristine larger canvas he had been saving, a genuine cotton duck he'd splurged on with a week's worth of bus money. He stared at it, the white canvas no longer a terrifying void, but an opportunity. Marcus and the walls had given him defiance. Ms. Harper and the contest had given him permission to be vulnerable. He decided to paint something that was neither street art nor angry protest. He was going to confront the ghost in the machine, the gray, silent loss that had defined his life for over a year. He would paint the memory of his father. He worked for 3 straight days, driven by a clarity he'd never experienced. He didn't paint the funeral or the hospital room or the sadness. He painted his father's last memory, the one that Eli constantly replayed in his head. His father, a master carpenter, laughing, holding a freshly planed piece of pine in the sun. Eli painted the wood's rough, golden grain with minute, loving detail. He painted the powerful curve of his father's hand. But he didn't stop there. He surrounded the figure with darkness, the creeping oblivion that had swallowed him whole. Yet, cutting through the heavy shadow was a single clean shaft of sunlight, rendered in brilliant, almost violent white and yellow. It was his truth. The pain was real, the darkness was present, but the love, the light of the memory, was enduring, breaking through the shadow. It was not rendered as tragedy, but as light breaking through darkness. It was the hardest, most necessary piece he had ever created. He painted until his eyes burned and his hands ached, pouring every ounce of his suppressed grief and love onto the canvas. When he finally stepped back, he knew with a calm certainty that this piece, vulnerable, personal, and profoundly honest, was the one Miss Harper had been waiting for. He called it the grain of light, and for the first time in a long time, Eli felt ready for the world to look back at him. The night of the final judging for the City Youth Art Contest was an event Eli endured, not enjoyed. He stood in the corner of the polished gallery space, the collar of his borrowed jacket tight around his neck, wishing he could blend into the white wall. He felt like an imposter, a street kid in a world of cultivated taste and whispered critiques. The grain of light was hung prominently, bathed in a perfect, solitary spotlight. It looked painfully exposed, its emotional intensity jarring next to the cooler, more cerebral works surrounding it. He watched the stream of people pass by his canvas. They paused longer at his painting than at the others. He could see their expressions shift, not to amusement or dismissal but to a quiet, deep contemplation. They weren't just looking at paint, they were reading his memory, his loss, his desperate attempt to hold on to light breaking through darkness. He saw a woman dab her eyes with a tissue. He saw an old man lean close, his posture suddenly slumped in recognition. Strangers stared at his work in silence, and that silence was louder than any applause. It wasn't the fleeting attention of a street audience, it was the focused, respectful gaze of people who were genuinely moved by its emotion. Eli realized that by being brutally honest about his own specific pain, he had somehow tapped into a universal sorrow. His art had bridged the gap between his private trauma and the collective human experience of grief. The tension was suffocating. Eli was already planning his quick escape when the contest director, a woman with a magnificent shock of gray hair and an equally dramatic silk scarf, took the stage. After a few opening remarks, she got straight to the point. "The recipient of this year's first-place prize," she announced, her voice booming with surprising volume, "is an artist who used profound technical skill, not to disguise their subject but to reveal their soul. A true act of courage. The winner is Eli Carter for The Grain of Light." Eli's painting wins first place. The applause was immediate and deafening. Eli stood frozen, convinced for a moment he had misheard. Miss Harper appeared at his elbow, her face radiating pride, and gently nudged him forward. He walked to the stage in a daze, accepting the engraved plaque with a hand that shook slightly. He managed a curt nod, unable to formulate a single word. He was seen, fully and completely, not as a vandal or a project, but as a recognized artist. The real shift, however, happened moments later. As the crowd began to thin, a distinguished-looking man with an intense, analytical gaze approached him. This was Professor Langston, a revered painting instructor from the local university and a longtime fixture in the city's fine arts scene. He didn't offer a cliché, he offered a critique. The contrast between the density of the shadow and the almost reckless abandon of that single shaft of yellow, Professor Langston said, his voice measured. "That isn't just paint, son. That's a statement about survival." Eli, who was used to Marcus's terse, streetwise instruction, found himself nodding along to the academic language. "You have the core material," the professor continued, lowering his voice conspiratorially, "but you need structure. You need a safe place to fail, to experiment, to build a formal vocabulary around that furious voice you have." He then did what Eli had thought impossible. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and handed Eli a crisply printed card, not a business card but a formal letterhead. Professor Langston offers him a scholarship, a fully funded spot in the prestigious, intensive youth arts program the university ran every summer. It included access to proper studios, unlimited supplies, and direct mentorship. "I don't care about your grades or your background," Langston stated plainly. "I care that you didn't flinch when you painted your greatest fear. Show up next month. The world needs to hear more than just one scream from you, Eli." Eli held the paper, his fingers tracing the engraved university crest. This wasn't a $20 cleaning fee. This wasn't a quick cash reward. This was a future. It was a formal, undeniable path out of the gray, an escape route secured not by luck or pity, but by the strength of his own unvarnished truth. He rode the bus home, the plaque and the scholarship letter resting on his lap. He felt an intense, quiet euphoria. When he walked into the apartment, the usual silence didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt expectant. Denise was sitting at the kitchen table, waiting, having seen the news flash on her phone at the hospital. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but she was smiling, the first genuine, unburdened smile Eli had seen on her face in months. She didn't need to ask for details. She just stood up and hugged him tight, her work-worn hands clutching the back of his neck. "My artist," she murmured into his hair. "You found your voice, baby. You finally found it." In that moment, standing in the familiar, slightly run-down kitchen, the weight he'd been carrying since his father died finally shifted. He had always been seen by the world as a poor kid, or the boy whose father died, defined entirely by his lack. Now he was being seen as something else entirely. For the first time, Eli feels seen, not as a poor kid, not as a tragedy, but as an artist. The healing he had sought in the anonymity of the walls and the silence of his room had arrived through the most frightening action of all, the act of complete self-exposure. He looked at the scholarship letter. The colors of his life, once muted and bruised, were finally beginning to take on the vibrant, complex shades of possibility. The gray was receding, replaced by the full, terrifying spectrum of the soul. He knew this was only the beginning. The world seemed calibrated to the pitch of possibility. Eli was preparing for his first formal exhibition, a small, featured show at a local gallery organized by Professor Langston as a preview of the summer program. He had started collecting his best work. The small, intense acrylics from his bedroom, the powerful sketches, and, of course, the grain of light. He was riding a powerful current, fueled by the scholarship and the unexpected validation of the contest. He was still painting on the streets with Marcus, but now his work had a new confidence, a richer emotional range. He felt invincible, as if the gray specter of his past was finally powerless. It was a Monday afternoon, only 3 days before his first exhibition. Eli was supposed to be meeting Marcus to talk through a new mural concept. Instead, as he rounded the corner onto his street, he saw the plume of smoke. It wasn't the usual dark industrial haze of the city. This was a thick, black column that felt instantly, sickeningly personal. It was coming from the community center. Eli ran. By the time he reached the scene, the fire department was already battling the inferno, but the damage was overwhelming. The old building, with its dry timber and history of neglect, had gone up fast. The cause, police and fire officials determined later, was an accidental electrical fault in the building's unused basement, a tragically prosaic end for a place that had housed so much memory. Eli stood on the sidewalk, watching the flames devour the space where he had found his first canvas, the place where his journey had begun. It wasn't the building itself that sent the ice-cold shock through him, it was the realization of what was inside. After the community center had closed, Mr. Jenkins, the manager, had taken a soft spot for Eli, viewing the canvas kid as the center's last flicker of creative life. He had given Eli a key to an old, rarely used storage room in the back, a private space where he could work on larger pieces and keep his overflow canvases safe from the humidity and clutter of apartment 3C. Now, as the roof collapsed with a sickening roar, Eli knew. Many of Eli's early paintings are lost. The first messy strokes, the raw, unfiltered emotional maps of his early grief, the work that had been his necessary scream, was gone, consumed by the same indifference and neglect that had defined his world a year ago. The loss was immediate and devastating. It wasn't just paint and canvas, it was a year of silent, desperate progress, a physical archive of his transformation. It felt like the city once again was reaching out to erase him. The public erasure of the mural had been painful. This was a private, total annihilation. It was proof that light didn't last, that fire would always follow creation. He sank to his knees on the wet pavement, the acrid smell of smoke filling his lungs. He was devastated. The scholarship, the award, the recognition, all of it felt hollow. Why paint if everything was destined to turn to ash? He saw the gray again, thicker and darker than before. His spirit broke. He almost gives up. He didn't go home until after midnight, dragging himself back to the apartment with paint dust still on his hands and the smell of smoke in his hair. Denise was waiting up, her face etched with worry. She didn't need words. The evening news had already flashed images of the ruined center. "They're all gone, Mom," he whispered, the sound catching in his throat. "My first ones. The ones that meant the most." He expected pity, but Denise looked at him with a weary, knowing strength. She pulled a chair up next to him and took his smoke-stained hands in hers. "Listen to me, Eli," she said, her voice low and steady. "I lost a man I loved. You lost a father. That's a memory you carry every single day. The deepest part of him, the light of him, isn't in a box or a photograph. It's in how you walk, how you speak, how you paint." She squeezed his hands, her eyes holding his. "Art doesn't live on the wall, baby. It lives in you." She paused, letting the profound simplicity of the statement sink in. "The paintings you lost? They were just the maps. The journey is still here." She tapped his chest, right over his heart. "You made them once because you had to. You can make them again because you can." Her words were an unexpected, perfect counter to the fire. They reminded him that his voice wasn't dependent on an object. It was a resident quality, an inherent power. The true work wasn't on the canvas. It was the ability to translate the pain into beauty over and over again. The fire had taken his past, but his mother's words gave him his future. He looked at the scholarship letter pinned to his wall, then at the large, empty canvas he had prepared for the exhibition. He couldn't show a collection of pieces now. He had to create something new, something that acknowledged the loss but transcended it. He went back to his room. He didn't sleep. He cleaned his brushes and squeezed out fresh tubes of color. Eli starts again, not copying but reimagining. He worked through the night, recreating his lost pieces from memory, letting the sorrow and the smoke and the overwhelming gratitude for his mother's wisdom guide his hand. He channeled his grief into the canvas one last time, making it not a monument to failure, but a declaration of defiance against erasure. Painting through grief once more, he understood that the true masterpiece was his own resilience, his ability to create light even when surrounded by the ashes of his past. The exhibition was in 3 days. He had to finish a new, defining piece. The opening night of the exhibition was not the celebratory affair Eli had planned, but something deeper, quieter, and more profound. The initial confusion about the missing body of work had been replaced by a quiet reverence when Professor Langston explained the fire's destruction and Eli's decision to present a single, defining, last-minute piece. It was a testament to the fact that the art world, for all its polish, still respected sheer, defiant resilience. Eli's work was hung on the central, most prominent wall, the wall that had been intended to hold a dozen canvases. Now it held only one. The painting was huge, occupying the space with an audacious gravity that silenced the buzzing crowd. It was his final, most complete statement, and he had titled it, simply, "The Boy Behind the Canvas." The piece was a monumental fusion of everything he had learned. It depicted a child, small and hunched, not facing the viewer but facing a massive, crumbling stone wall. The wall was painted in the heavy, textured grays and bruised browns of his earliest, most tormented work. Cracks spider-webbed across the stone, symbolizing the brokenness, the loss, the indifference of the city. But through the deepest, widest fissure in the wall, light was breaking through the cracks. Not a gentle light, but a sharp, vibrant, almost aggressive burst of gold, white, and electric blue, the color of pure, unspent possibility. The boy was not running from the wall or protesting it. He was bent low, hands furiously working a brush, painting the light into the cracks, turning the fissure into a portal. It was a self-portrait rendered not through his physical appearance, but through his action and his purpose. It was the moment he stopped waiting for the light and began creating it himself, accepting that every masterpiece begins as pain, but doesn't have to end there. When the velvet rope was finally removed, the crowd surged forward. Eli stood far back, next to his mother and Marcus, watching the reactions. The silence that fell over the patrons was total. The crowd stands in silent awe. They weren't reacting to a beautiful object. They were reacting to an act of emotional alchemy, the transformation of destruction into destiny. Professor Langston nodded slowly, his eyes shining with professional satisfaction. Miss Harper wept quietly. Marcus didn't speak. He just punched Eli lightly on the arm and gave him a look of pure, unreserved respect. For the first time since he found that forgotten stack of canvases, Eli felt no anxiety, no shame, and no overwhelming need to disappear. He didn't chase the applause that finally erupted, or the journalists who pressed forward with their notebooks and flashes. The validation wasn't coming from the crowd, it was rising from a new, solid place within him. He had faced his greatest fear, the exposure of his deepest truth, and found not rejection but connection. He just smiles, knowing he's finally told his story. The boy who saw only gray had finished painting his origin. The final scene, a year later, is one of culmination and continuation. The community center, rebuilt and renamed the Canvas Collective, stands brighter and more resilient than before. Eli is now 17, preparing to leave for the university art program, but today he is on his knees, not painting for recognition but for transmission. He is surrounded by a group of shy, curious neighborhood children, their faces smudged with paint and awe. The wall they are working on is a newly plastered, vast expanse. It will be the center's new signature mural. Eli hands a small girl a can of vibrant magenta, showing her how to hold it steady. He looks at their young, tentative faces, seeing the seeds of his own past silence reflected in their fear of the blank space. He thinks of the empty wall, the erased mural, and the fire. He thinks of Marcus's teaching and his mother's enduring wisdom. He is no longer the lost boy of 3C but a bridge, a guide. He looks up at the towering, expectant wall and then at the children, his smile easy and genuine. He offers them the final piece of wisdom he had to earn with silence, tears, and fire. "The world might try to erase you," Eli says, his voice clear and resonant, no longer a whisper. He taps the girl's brush gently. "Paint anyway." He steps back, letting them make their first messy, glorious strokes of color. The gray is gone. Eli Carter, the artist, had begun the world again. Dear viewer, if you've watched up to this point, thank you for your support. I have a small request. If you enjoy my stories, you can subscribe to the channel, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts about the stories in the comments. Enjoy watching. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video.